JC the King. So my view on socialism is I assume you mean love history and you enjoy studying it. Now, from what I've read about and studied, is that almost every communist nation started as socialists, and while there is a way to prevent converting to communism, we would be more vulnerable to it. Well, so here's the thing, JC the King. So socialism has two main components. So in order for something to be socialist, it needs to do two things. The first thing is it needs to have the workers seize the means of production. And I'll go over what that means. And the second thing is that it needs to decommodify at least a significant number of things. Now, the degrees to which these things are implemented vary according to different socialist theories. I'm not going to get into the weeds about that, but I'm going to keep it very simple and talk about what my proposal is. And I think that you'll agree that it's relatively reasonable. So, socialism, or rather market socialism, which is what I advocate for, basically advocates for more freedom and democracy in the workplace. And the form that that would take is workers, would all be involved in their company as a worker co-op. So worker co-ops are actually things that we have right now, and some of them in the United States are actually incredibly large, multi-billion dollar a year companies, okay? So an example that I commonly give on the stream, Ocean Spray is an agricultural worker co-op. And they gross like $2 billion every year. Now, what I think we should do is have a program to slowly transition our private corporations into worker co-ops. And Bernie Sanders actually had a really good plan for this. And that plan was to anytime a company wanted to sell to another company, they would first have to put the company up to sale to the workers. So workers could collectively band together and buy the company and own it as a worker co-op. Now, so the transition would not be like at gunpoint, the workers own your company now. You know, you're out on the street. Like, it wouldn't be any of that, but it would be like a slow transition over time to where most, if not all, of the companies in the U.S. would be worker co-ops. And why do I think worker co-ops are a good idea? Well, the data we have on them indicates that they are more efficient, they are more productive, the workers are happier, they are more like economically resilient. So basically, worker co-ops outperform traditional company structures by a fairly significant margin. Um, and boss, I'll get to you in a minute, okay? And so, as for decommodifying the market, essentially what that means in market socialism is you would provide a base level of goods. So, like, you know, everyone would have access to free healthcare. Everyone would have access to certain staple foods, electricity, water, internet, the things you need to live a life under in a modern society. And if you wanted a higher standard of living after that, you would go get a job as a member of a worker co-op, you know, take on a job in that. And that would be a way to gain more luxury goods, like, you know, Pop-Tarts. Pop-Tarts wouldn't be part of your staple food, but it would be something you could buy at like a luxury grocery store, or like a Nintendo GameCube 5, you know, whatever. Video games, entertainment, additional things to enrich your life. And you could use that money to even start your own worker co-op, or go to school, or stuff like that. Um, a thing I hear a lot is that rich people who own companies are awful people that used other people to gain their power. Now, when one starts a company, let's say a pencil company, the owner is carrying the risk of it. They have to buy machinery, get the materials, pay the bills, etc. And the employee, while they are doing more physical work than the CEO, they don't have the same risk. They know, well, the issue, JC the King, is that once the owner of the company has put down the money as risk, um, they don't have to do any work forever. Uh, like they that like literally, you found a company, you can pay someone else to manage it. You don't actually have to be involved in the day to day labor. You don't have to be in, like, for example, Bill Gates. Bill Gates at one point was coding alongside the other coders in the company. He doesn't do that anymore. Instead, he largely just collects the money and value of the uh, risk that he put down. Um, and I think that there are better ways that we could incentivize like innovation rather than rewarding people who are essentially not doing work. Um, and to get back to what I was talking about before, if you had those two things, your country is socialist. Most countries in on the world, in the history of the world, have had neither of those two things. Even the nominally socialist, or like USSR, or China under Mao, like even Cuba, like Cuba's maybe the closest to socialism. But even then, I don't know enough about Cuba's internal structure currently to say whether or not they are socialist. Um, but the issue here is that, furthermore, you're talking about communism, and communism, I think, is a much harder thing to achieve. Uh, the issue being that communism has a third further stipulation, and that is the abolition of the state as a social construct. So, like, no country that has ever existed has been communist, because literally, by definition, a country runs counter to the existence of communism. Um, it's just it. You know, what we have had in the past is not communism. What we have had in the past is typically some sort of like centralized economic planning as directed by an authoritarian regime, which is not the same thing as socialism, and it's not the same thing as communism. Um, so there are different those are the issues that I have with saying, like, oh, you know, the social, if you achieve socialism, you're more like vulnerable to communism, when the reality is that, like, most countries have never even come close to achieving socialism. But I think we could do it, and we could do it peacefully, and we could do it in a way that enriches everybody's life, without infringing on their freedoms. Because I actually think that my version of socialism um, encourages more freedom, gives people more freedom in their workplace. Um, and well, again, Taylor Swift, we talked about that the other day. Do the workers own the means of production in Venezuela? No, no, they don't. They have a welfare state, which is different than a socialist state. Like, the conception among conservatives is that uh, the government doing things is socialism, which is not what socialism is. Um, Socialism is a very specific set of things, some of which is done by the government, but that's not, like, equating government doing things with socialism is like a 5-year old's conception of what socialism might be. Um, Socialism is made to look good. It just doesn't really work. Why do you think the people coming from China or Russia? It's because they've experienced that society. Well, the thing is, JC the King, I just went over, like, the two things that you need for socialism. One being workers owning the means of production, and two, the decommodification of the market. China hasn't decommodified their market at all. And the workers 100% don't own the means of production in China. So what I was saying is that states like China or USSR Russia weren't socialist or communist. They were communist in name. They called themselves communist. They used the aesthetic of communism, but what they were centrally planned economies under authoritarian regimes, which is very different. Um, so why do people flee Cuba? Well, I mean, so Taylor Swift, a lot of the people who fled Cuba were the wealthy people in Cuba. So like the obviously the wealthy people in Cuba who lost some material wealth during the revolution, or lost loyalist sympathizing family members or friends in the revolution. Obviously, they're going to harbor some ill will towards the government of current day Cuba. Um, it would likely not be your version of it, sadly. Well, yeah, but like that's like the that's the issue, JC the King. I'm pushing for my version. I'm pushing for my version to win out. And I think that my version is actually based on a lot of facts and a lot of evidence that we already have. Like, for example, again, worker co-ops are superior to traditional private companies in a whole slew of aspects. Um, and we have more than enough wealth in the country to actually provide a basic standard of living for even those who are out of work. So, like, I think that my version of socialism is completely achievable with what we have right now, with the resources we have right now. And I think it's also worth pointing out that our productivity in the United States is at the highest it's ever been. But the worker's wage got decoupled in the 1970s from productivity. So since the 1970s until today, right now the average worker wage is around $36,000 a year. But if it had kept pace with our productivity, the average worker wage in the United States, or salary, sorry, would be over $100,000 a year. So, like, we have the material wealth in this country to provide a standard of living equal to what the middle class enjoys all across the United States. Um, but we choose not to because we want our government caters to the wealthy more so than the working class. And I think that having companies instead being run by workers would actually create an amount of solidarity and change the political landscape in such a way that our politicians wouldn't have to take their lead from this actual cooperative working class. Um, and from there, we can provide like basic standards of living. So I think once we reach like market socialism, I'm open from there to further bettering our society. But that's kind of my case for it, you know? Um, okay, good night, JC the King. It was really nice talking with you. And it's okay if you don't agree with me, okay? But I'm glad you gave me the chance to lay out my arguments.